So one of the most important measures of our economy, how the health in our economy is doing, is the unemployment rate. How many people are working, how many people are being productive, how many people aren't working, who can find work, who can't. But there's a lot of problems with the way that this is figured out. We don't just have everybody in the country surveyed all of the time and saying if they're working or not, if they're unemployed. And some of the things that count as unemployed and as not unemployed are kind of sketchy. They don't make a lot of sense the way that it's done. So we're going to talk about some of that. You hear all of the time politicians talking about a 4% or a 5% unemployment rate, and that's why they need to be reelected. But where do those numbers come from? How much can we trust them? Statistics is always subjective. It is not a very honest science, to say the least. It can be manipulated in many, many ways, and the unemployment rate is a grand example of manipulating statistics to try to make something look like it might not really be in real life and in real society. So let's take a look at it. So before we can understand what the problems with the unemployment rate is and how they can tout it as something that it's not and misrepresent it to the public, we need to know what it is made of. What are the four types of unemployment? Well, the first one is called cyclical unemployment. And just like it sounds like, it is following the business cycle. Because think about what happens in business. Sometimes business is doing really, really well and you're making money, you're hiring people. Well, when you hire those people, they're no longer unemployed, so the unemployment rate is going to go down. Now, sometimes there's a recession or a depression or this like COVID-19 thing that we're doing where a bunch of workers are getting laid off, business isn't doing well, so the unemployment is going to spike, it's going to get higher. Now that up and down, that ebb and flow, that really jagged looking line, is just what happens on a normal basis throughout the years in a business cycle. So we call that cyclical unemployment. Now the next one that we need to know about is called natural unemployment. This is the amount of unemployment that would normally be happening in the country. It's natural, just like it sounds. And you can think of it as kind of an average, kind of a smoothed out kind of unemployment. So if you look at this line, it follows the same path and the same pattern as the cyclical unemployment, but all of the peaks and valleys, the high points and low points are gone, and they're kind of smashed down so that it's a nice, smooth looking line instead of a really jagged one. And the average is how we would describe the natural unemployment rate. Now the next one is called structural unemployment. People that are structurally unemployed have lost their job because of perhaps a technological innovation has made their job obsolete. They may have been working in a factory and some sort of robot has replaced the job that they were doing, so they're not needed in that particular position anymore. They're laid off, they're unemployed, they have to look for a new job. Maybe they were a cashier in a supermarket, and now the new machines where you can go and check yourself out as a customer have replaced their jobs, so they need to go and look for a new one. That's structural unemployment. Something has been innovated that has made it so that your job isn't needed anymore, so you need to go and find a new one. That happens all of the time. It's one of the reasons why a 0% unemployment rate is an unrealistic idea. There's no way we'll be at zero because somebody will always be looking for a job. Part of that is because technology and changes in our lifestyle make it so that we need to change our jobs and the things that we do all of the time. So our next one And our final one is called frictional unemployment. Now this one is just like the transitional kind of unemployment. You've left one job because you finished part of your education and you need to go and now apply for the new job that you're going to be getting. That period of transition between one job and another is frictional unemployment. You're still unemployed because you're looking for a job, but it's not because your job's obsolete. It's just because you're moving from one place to another. You could have just had one contract end and you're just waiting for your next contract to begin, for people that do contract type of labor. So those are our 4 types of unemployment that are taken into the unemployment rate. And if you look at it, the frictional and the structural, if you add those together, then that's your natural unemployment rate. So now we know the 4 parts of unemployment, what it's made up of. But how is it determined? Where do they come up with these numbers? Where do they get them from? How do they figure this thing out? Well, let's take a look at it. The actual data, the information is gathered by the Census Bureau, and then it's reported by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So every month they do a survey, the Census Bureau does. And this survey is done by phone calls and going around knocking on doors. And they can't do everybody in the United States. It's way too big. It would take too much time and too much money. So their survey is of 60,000 people. And these are made up of random parts of every state. They try to get rural areas and urban areas to get a good sampling of the population. 60,000 people is a lot of people to be surveying every month, but you would need something that's at least that large to get anything that's even realistic, because then they multiply that and that's how they figure out what the numbers actually are. They started doing this in 1940, then they reformed it in 1994. So after they do the survey and after they get all of the information from anybody that's participating in it, whoever answered the questions, whether they told the truth or not, we don't know. They take the total of people that are unemployed or that they've deemed as being unemployed, divided by the total of people that are in the labor force, and that is how they come up with our unemployment rate. Alright, so now let's get into what some of these problems are. So we know that they figured this out through a survey. It's the total of unemployed people divided by the total in the labor force times 100. That gives us the unemployment rate. But what is this labor force? What's it made out of? Who's in it? Who's qualified? These are where the problems start. So adults that are age 18 or older are in the labor force. So teenagers don't count, even if you've dropped out of school to try to help your family. You're not employed, you're not unemployed. It starts at 18. These are all able-bodied people, so anybody that's disabled, anybody that can't work because of a physical or mental disability is not included in the unemployment rate. They're not part of the workforce. So even though they're not working, they're obviously unemployed. They're not part of that number, that big percentage that they're always talking about whenever the media announces what the unemployment rate is. The other thing is these are civilians. So if you don't qualify as being a civilian, then that means that you're not included in the unemployment rate, and that's going to be a much bigger number than you would think that it is. So the other part of that is that you're in the workforce, the labor force, if you're employed or if you're actively looking for work. Those are the only things that qualify you, which is going to skew that number a lot, especially when you start to break it down and get to the details or special circumstances that come up based on the questions that they ask on their survey. So we've seen the problems with who is actually in the workforce and who isn't, who qualifies to be there. That's the denominator in our equation for figuring out what the unemployment rate. The numerator is our total unemployed. So who actually is unemployed? Well, those are people on unemployment, right? No, we can't do that because unemployment is only for a specified amount of time, and people may be out of work for longer than you get unemployment benefits, and then everybody doesn't qualify for unemployment benefits. Maybe you haven't had the job for a very long amount of time, or it was just a temporary contract job, or you were fired for a legitimate reason that is going to disqualify you for unemployment. So we can't base the unemployment rate on that, or who is unemployed on people that are getting benefits. So we have to base it on something else. So through their survey, through asking the different questions that they have a certain criteria for determining if you're unemployed or if you're not unemployed. And the main criteria is that you've looked for work in the last 4 weeks. So they'll ask you if you've been on a job interview, if you've submitted a resume, if you've gone through like a workforce commission type of website, if you've handed in applications or any of that. If you've done that within the last 4 weeks, basically a month, then you are considered unemployed. And the other criteria is that you qualify to be part of the labor force. So even if you're looking for a job, if you have some sort of a disability or if you're not the right age, then you're not going to be included in that number, which is going to make our equation come out to represent something that is outside of what's really going on. So if our numerator and our denominator are both skewed so that they don't represent what is happening in real life, then the number that comes out of dividing those two is also going to represent something that is extremely unrealistic. Alright, so now that we have our equation, we have our different inputs that go into it, and we know how it's made up, we know the survey that they use, and we can see some of the problems. Let's look a little bit deeper at the numbers that they're putting into this. Now the first problem comes because of this having to look for work within the last 4 weeks. We have what are called discouraged workers. They've been looking for a job, they can't find one, they have just had it, so they're not in the actual numbers of the unemployed. If they say, no, I haven't looked for a job in the last 4 weeks, then they're not included in those numbers. You could be unemployed for 2 years, but because you haven't filled out an application, then you're not part of the unemployment rate. The other part of that is we have what are called marginally attached workers. These are workers that they may suffer from depression. They still want to get a job, but they're having a lot of problems because of anxiety or mental illness. They can't pay their bills. Maybe they're taking care of a household member, or they're a homemaker. They are watching a newborn child for a certain amount of time before they go back to work. These people are marginally attached. They still want to work, but they're not actively looking for work. So even though they don't have a job, they're not considered unemployed. And when you think about all of the caretakers and all of the housewives and people that are depressed or just can't find anything across the entire country, that number is going to get pretty big pretty quickly, and none of them are accounted for in our official unemployment rate. Then we have what are called underemployed people. These are people maybe with a college degree that their job had ended and they still need to pay their bills, so they went and they worked at a coffee shop just to pay the rent and keep the electricity on while they're looking for another job. These people are not considered unemployed. They are considered employed no matter what their job is, how big of a pay cut they had to take, or how much this job actually makes them work every single week. That brings us to our next problem with this, is our part-time and our gig working economy. Now, this coronavirus crisis is going on where everybody has been laid off, and we have Uber Eats and we have Grubhub and we have Instacart, different grocery delivery places, people delivering for companies so that the companies can still remain open, but this isn't their job. It's something that they've signed up for just in the meantime while they're waiting to go back to work. So if you've done a job, like say you went and mowed your neighbor's lawn for $20, then you are employed, and you're not going to be counted in our national unemployment rate because they're going to consider you gainfully employed at that point. Now, that's some of the problems that are really major, because you can imagine how many people fall into these types of categories that are just left out of this statistic that's being reported to the general public, and then decisions are being made like who you're going to vote for or how good the economy is doing based on that information. And we know that that information can be really flawed. Anytime that you're doing any type of survey or statistics, there's going to be room for error on all of them. It's not a perfect science by any means, and the unemployment rate is extremely important for us to know. It's one of the main measures of how our economy is doing. It's the thermometer to the health of our economy. If unemployment starts to spike up and go really high, then the economy is doing bad at that point. If unemployment's really low, then that means that businesses are doing really well, that the economy should be doing pretty well. So it's very important to know what our unemployment rate is, but there are problems with the way that we do it. A lot of people get left out, and here are some other issues. The first one is our military is not counted in the unemployment rate. There's a lot of people in the United States military. All of those people are not civilians. This is the civilian unemployment rate. It is fair to say that everybody that's in the United States military has a job. The second part of that is we don't count prisoners as being unemployed. There's millions of people that are incarcerated, that aren't working, that are not part of the labor force. None of them are counted into the unemployment rate. Then the last one is undocumented workers. We have a problem with immigration policy in the United States, and there are a lot of people that come here that do not have documents. They're not citizens. They are not counted in the unemployment rate. You'll hear statistics stating how many undocumented workers there are, and I sit and I scratch my head. I'm like, well, how can you even guess, with an educated guess, make any type of extrapolation as to how many undocumented workers there are? We don't know. That's the condition of them being undocumented. is that they are here under the radar and nobody knows about them. So there's more problems with it, but they're not as glaring as these ones. But I hope that you understand what the unemployment rate is, what unemployment is made up of, how we figure out our unemployment rate, the process that we use, and the equation that we apply to it, and then what some of the problems that are associated with it are. So when you hear somebody using this particular statistic in some sort of way to try to make themselves look good or to make somebody else look really bad, then you have to know how easy this particular statistic and rate is to skew in your favor. Well, that's it, guys. We talked about the 4 parts of unemployment. We talked about the unemployment rate and how it is determined, how it's made up, how it's figured out. Then we talked about some of the problems with it. So I hope you guys have a better understanding of what's wrong with the unemployment rate, how it can be misused and misinterpreted, and what's right with it, how it can be used to measure the health of the economy, and how it's something that we do need to be using on at least a monthly basis. So I hope you guys are having a great day. Thank you for watching. Be good people and do good things.